Board Director.
I see him on there, but I think he's muted.
Yeah, is it muted?
Here.
Board Director Brunton. Board Director Emery.
Here.
And Board Director Lean.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, Madeline, I'm finished, Madeline. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think we're going to be moving on, whoever is going to be making the presentation, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Dave Jeffries. I'm an emergency management consultant. I've been working with the city and other local jurisdictions for a while. I'll just introduce myself briefly. In addition to working with local agencies, I'm also with the North Bay Incident Management Team, the Type 3 team that's been on pretty much every fire north of San Francisco for the last few years, at least in the opening act. And I was part of the team that came in to support the city of Sonoma's EOC during the 17 fires. So I've been working with you folks for a while. Appreciate you all being here. I was raised by a Santa Rosa council member, so I understand the dedication and time you folks all put into what you're doing, and hope you find this presentation informative for you. So starting with, when we're talking about emergencies and disasters, what is your role? And you actually have a lot of roles in this. It may not be that first responder out there dealing with the fire or the panic or the evacuation, but there's things that we want you to be cognizant of. One is that the emergency staff, whether it's the Emergency Operations Center staff being opened or through the fire chief or through the city manager, should be able to fill you in once the dust settles a little bit about what's going on. Should you be involved in communicating things to the public? And we'll talk more about that a little later, about how that should occur in the best fashion for everybody. Certainly, the city council will be involved in issuing proclamations when those become necessary, helping as a liaison to the community. Certainly the policy piece for both the fire board and the city council, probably involved in the recovery effort when we get to that, and meetings and oversight, and also in the meantime, making sure you're trained and ready for this and being able to visit shelters and other sorts of things that are going on. One of the things that we suggest to you is, as time allows, to look at some additional training beyond just this short presentation. These 3 courses I've identified here are all provided by FEMA, and they're independent study courses, which means 1, they're free, 2, they're online, and 3, they're all relatively short. And they'll give you just a little deeper glimpse into how our national system is set up. The National Incident Management System has been around for many years now. And in many ways, it looks a lot like the even older California Standardized Emergency Management System. We're fortunate in California to live in an emergency management laboratory where we get to experience a little bit of everything. And so California really led the way to this national management system that we have now. In the time that we're, I don't want to say waiting, but before we actually have to deal with an emergency, there are things that you can be doing to make sure you're ready for this. And one is making sure you've got key phone numbers, department heads, each other, those key numbers you're going to need in an emergency, because when that time comes, you don't want to have to be running around Googling them or searching for them or trying to remember where you left them. It's certainly easier now with smartphones to have those with you. Earlier in my career, you'd see a lot of business card size laminated cards chock full of numbers that had to be changed all the time. But do make sure that you've got that contact information you need in an emergency to be able to reach out to the right people. For you and your families, what is your emergency plan? How are you going to take care of folks? And we have this issue with our frontline workers as well, that if they are prepared, if they have a plan, if they know their family's taken care of and they're safe, then we can get them focused on what we need them to do in the emergency. And it's the same for all of you. How are you going to get hold of each other after an emergency? Do you have, it's often recommended, an out of the area contact you can all call to check in with? What emergency supplies do you have at home? Those things that will let you leave in comfort to go to work. Participate in the training, the sessions I just mentioned to you, as well as when the time arises for tabletop exercises and other trainings that we do, to give you a chance to kind of get in, get your feet wet as to how some of these things will work. And also in this time that between emergencies, to be out there and be supportive of the community preparedness efforts, encourage people to get involved, encourage people to plan, encourage people to have those supplies. Certainly in the Sonoma community, they've certainly had enough experiences the last few years to recognize the value of being prepared and to put some time and effort into that. Now, once we get into an event, this is probably one of the key sections here in this for you, is as we all see on TV all the time, the media loves to come up with a microphone and try to get some good quotes. And we want you to be prepared to do that. The challenge we have is that facts change rapidly, rumors fly, and an adage I've heard a lot is, well, it was on Twitter, so it must be true. And we know that's not really the case. So in the middle of an emergency, reaching back to the emergency operations center when it's open, or through the city manager or the fire chief, to, if you're going to be out where someone may be trying to ask you questions, make sure you've got the most current information. Is even if we brief you, if we brief you at noon today on an emergency, by now a lot of stuff could have changed. And as you watch the media, you may sometimes see things like, reporter will come up and throw out a microphone and like, isn't it tragic about the 4 people that died in that house fire? What are your comments? And you feed in a bunch of comments, and you're trying to be empathetic and all. Well, do you know that anybody died in that fire? In one sense, you're validating the reporter's guess by even responding to that question. So, be careful of, listen carefully to the questions they're asking to make sure that you don't end up being, the spokesperson from the city of Sonoma or the Sonoma Valley Fire Rescue Authority, expressed sympathy for these deaths. Well, it may turn out that nobody died there or nothing's been reported yet. So watch out for those kind of leading questions where they're trying to get you essentially to validate their guesses. And we do want to make sure you have the right information. We also, if you get a request to speak to the media during an event like this, to please reach out to make sure you've got the latest briefing. And also, are there talking points? And I don't mean that as what you see, commercially with spin, but one of the things going on in the background is we expect the public information officers in the city and authority EOC to be working on those messages that we want to push out, and to be coordinating with the county and other cities on that joint messaging. So our messaging is supportive and not contradictory, because that will become a story in itself if we're going in different directions. So we do want to make sure that we are getting you that information, giving you that information that we want to make sure gets out to the public shortly, in a short, condensed version, easy to work with. And as it says here on the bottom of the slide, stick with facts and sources. It's easy to get caught up in the moment and get caught up in exaggerating it, but try to stick to what we know we have, not what somebody thinks it might be. And be careful with guessing. You all know this. You've probably all spoken to the media before, or dozens of times. But no comment doesn't always come off well, but it's easy to say, I don't have the answer to that. Let me research it and get back to you. One of the reasons I actually like working with public information officers, in my career before this was over 31 years in law enforcement and been a detective supervisor, and I was always being asked to talk to the press. I liked having a press officer because I could tell the press officer, you can talk about this, this, and this. And if they ask you something else, your answer is not no comment. It's, I don't have the answer. Let me get back to you. And we will try to get back to them. But that avoids accidentally releasing information that was supposed to be confidential, that wasn't ready for public release yet, or was unvalidated and we're still trying to clarify it. And again, you just have to watch the news for examples of how this doesn't always work that way. As you know, be careful going off the record. I don't really view anything off the record unless I have a long-term and personal relationship with that person of the media, that we've developed that trust, and that's a very small list. Don't argue with them. Don't lose your cool. Be really careful of what ifs. Try to stick to what we have, what we know we're doing. The problem with hypotheticals is you change one or two small elements and it completely changes your answer. And, if they're trying to report the story, then the what if may be trying to draw something out of you you're not ready to talk about. When you're working with the emergency staff, you're going to hear a lot of jargon. And you should ask if you're not sure what something means, but try to avoid using it yourself because you may not be using it in the right context. Or again, if you don't understand it, you probably should put it in a simpler version for folks to understand. If you're going to be talking to reporters, what are those things that you want to get out? What are those points you want to make? And I give the example when I've taught with young officers. If I'm talking to a radio station, then I want to give them short, tight sound bites that I know they can use on the radio station. If I'm with a newspaper reporter, we can have more of a dialogue and they can edit their story. If it's television, well, it's all about the visual and trying to give them the points they need. But think about what those points are. We need people to stay out of this area. We need, if you need shelter, here's who you contact. If you need food and water, here's who you contact. And try to make those points out there that are easy to digest and easy to move along. And if you've got notes, as review them, but try to appear relaxed and comfortable. And we want you to come across to the public as being authentic and credible and being that voice of authority. But that's also why we want to support you in that messaging to make sure the right information is coming out. Now, the scene, we have something going on in town and there's this desire to go out and see what's going on. And this is where, the advice is to be careful doing that. And a couple of things is you show up as a city council member, a board member, the mayor, whatever. You're not really in that operational chain of command, but you are somebody in the city or the authority. And that alone can cause some distraction and confusion to the responders out there. And it's absolutely critical that they work for their incident commander, their boss out there, and not get distracted and be able to focus on that and not have to worry about your safety and other sorts of things. So, best to let them take care of their business out there. There may become a time when, if there's interest, that a tour can be handled, and that's been done before in the fires, and that can be arranged and set up in a way that it's not a distraction to the first responders. Same thing with the Emergency Operations Center. It's much better if you call ahead and try to arrange a time or a good time to step in, so that you're not walking in the middle of something going on or becoming a distraction in there. And we try to keep visitors to a minimum there just for that reason, is folks should be focused on what they're doing in there. Now, as was already mentioned today in terms of who's on as panelists and who's not today, with councils and boards, you're all familiar with the Brown Act. It's an issue that comes up from time to time. And in these emergencies, you don't have the time to post an agenda a week in advance. So the Brown Act does provide for some flexibility in emergency situations. If you have an emergency, notifying the media an hour in advance and get that posted before the meeting is fine. What the state law calls dire emergency allows you to move even a little faster, and you may not get it. You'll want to show you tried to reach the media, but if you weren't successful, go ahead and deal with your dire emergency, whatever it is. And then the law provides some post-meeting obligations in terms of posting minutes, who you contacted, who you tried to contact, and things like that. So if you have this kind of a circumstance, again, there are ways for you to meet and make some key decisions. But I would also try to be realistic, like, that it's really an emergency at that moment. For instance, the earthquake hits and the city manager issues a proclamation. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. Well, you're covered for 7 days. So there's no need to do an emergency meeting the same day, overextending that. You've got time. But there may be issues because of the amount of money that needs to be expended, or the need to do curfews or other kinds of things that could become an emergency. And again, just want you to know that there is some flexibility in there for you. Now, about the only part of this presentation where the city and the authority are different is really the city and counties can establish local disaster councils, and the cities and counties can issue local emergency proclamations for the jurisdiction. Special districts, which is what the authority is, don't have those two things. And if you think about it, everything in California is either unincorporated county or incorporated city. And so the cities and counties, or in the case of San Francisco, the city and county, have those authorities that don't transfer down to the districts. I've got another jurisdiction I work with where, and it's similar to your situation where you have a fire authority rather than a fire department. The fire chief, even though they're not a city employee, can do a local emergency proclamation because we wrote it into the city ordinance, but only when they're serving as the EOC director, essentially in the city manager's stead. So there are some ways to work around that, but in generally, this is about the only difference here. So what is a local emergency? As I mentioned earlier, we live in a laboratory for emergencies, and we get a lot of experience with a lot of things, but it can be any of these things. And really, to carry it one step further, when I talk about emergencies and disasters, your police and your fire deal with emergencies all the time. That's what they're paid to do. Really, we're talking about when that emergency becomes 2, 3, 4 separate emergencies, or the emergency becomes of such magnitude that it's really overwhelming your local resources and more needs to be done. And we get into that disaster mode where we're going to open up the emergency operations center, larger mutual aid requirements, more staff to support more operations. But it could be any one or 2 or 3 of these things, as we've also learned here recently. These things can overlap. I mean, look at last year. We were dealing with PSPS and COVID and fire all at the same time. And that certainly elevates you from probably an emergency to that more needing that disaster kind of support. And there are EOCs around, like Sonoma County's was open for a long time. Marin opened their emergency operations center for COVID, and they haven't closed it yet, although they're on less staffing than they were. And that allowed them to be there to deal with all these types of emergencies. So I said, it's not just the fire, it's not just the earthquake. It can be any of these things. So I mentioned earlier the disaster declaration process, and just to talk about that just a little more for you. You either already have a local disaster or you see it coming at you. It doesn't have to be there yet, but it can be declared by the county or a city council in your case, or by the director of emergency services, which is your city manager. And then I said in some models, they delegate this down to the director of the emergency operations center. And I worked with Kathy a lot, and she was always good about being in the EOC. But in a different scenario, if it was an earthquake and you had a day shift, a night shift, and you're really beating your staff up, you're going to need other people besides one person to be that EOC director. And so that can be delegated to them as well. That delegation, that proclamation then goes through the county and up to the state, and we're looking for the gubernatorial declaration. And a lot of what that's about at that point is trying to get California Disaster Assistance Act funding from the state. And then also trying to get the state to push this combination of declarations from the region up to the feds, and having FEMA go through it and present to the president for a federal declaration, and opening up that even larger pipeline of funds that can come from the federal government. But it does start with you folks locally. And sorry, I have a dog under my desk that's attacking things that don't exist. The declaration by the emergency services director, i.e. city manager, is good for 7 days and can be then extended by the city council. And that's why I mentioned if your director's done a declaration, I don't really think that would be that emergency that you need to schedule a meeting on 1 hour's notice for. You have a little time. Then the declarations by you or an extension by you is good for 30 days and can continue to be extended until you shut that down. There were some pretty lengthy declarations due to COVID, just for the nature of it. And certainly a lot of the jurisdictions around here have been through this because of the wildland fires as well. But this process is one, this is where I would also be getting, excuse me, your city attorney involved in looking at the language and making sure you've got the extensions timed right, and what you're trying to do from these declarations as well. Is it, seeking that fiscal reimbursement? Are you also doing emergency ordinances such as curfews and things at the same time? And make sure that's all lined up. But at least at that point, once the declaration is done, you have a little time to work on some of these things. So to give you just a little background on how the system works, the classic pieces of our emergency response are mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And right now where we are is preparedness. We're getting ready. We're trying to do educational efforts, training with the staff, working on various projects. And there's some bleed over into mitigation. And mitigation are just those things we're trying to do to avoid or minimize the impact of the next disaster. And that can be simple things like hardening a building, putting generators in place, strengthening levees, any of those sorts of things. So that's all going on before the incident occurs. Once the incident occurs, we're in response. That's the part that makes the news. Law, fire, public works, your emergency operations center staff, everybody getting involved. And even while you're still in response, you're going to start to work on recovery. You may take part of your emergency operations center staff, some of your city and authority staff, and start working on, okay, how do we get back on our feet? And this is an important transition to the jurisdiction, because this is, it's pretty well documented that in a lot of disasters, there are businesses that just don't come back. And we're seeing that with COVID, and we've seen that with fires. But for the city's best interest and the authority's jurisdiction, you want these people, you want these businesses back open. You want people going back to work. You want people getting back in their homes. And so while the response piece is focused on the incident, standing this recovery piece up early on and getting it up to speed while you're still in response is very typical. And that may also come with working with the county, with other jurisdictions, to do those things that are unique to that particular disaster, and then rolling into long-term recovery. Sometimes these things take a long time. The Northridge earthquake, I believe FEMA had their recovery office open for some 15 years. Now, hopefully, we won't be saying lengths of time like that, but some of these things take a long time, and we want to get them started early and get everybody back on their feet. And this is also looking at the cycle here. When you start looking at, what should we do to mitigate next time? And we try to take advantage of these emergencies when they occur, even if they don't occur directly to us. Say, what could we do to mitigate this next time, and start working on projects again, so that next time this thing occurs, it won't be quite so dramatic for us. Now, the way the system works here, and this deals starting with the first responders, is we have these field events, traffic accidents, hazardous material spills, structure fires, whatever, that are running the field. If they get big enough, they have an incident command post, incident commander out there directing the law, fire, public works people. If it gets to be more than they can handle out of that, then we end up at the local government level, whether it's a city or a special district. And that's where you start to see the emergency operations center or a department operations center. And all a department operations center is you might have one for police, one for fire, one for public works. They're directing their operations, but working with the emergency operations center, taking care of the whole jurisdiction. As you need more help, then we reach up to the county, and the term we use is operational area. And they also have an emergency operations center, and they also have department operations centers like public health and public works and things. And that's our first point of contact for needing help. And so they'll try to find help within the county as best they can from other jurisdictions. But if we're all impacted, like we might have with the earthquake, then their next step in California is to go to the coastal region for the Office of Emergency Services. And they have a regional emergency operations center, and they're there to support the coastal region and move resources around the region as best they can to support everybody who needs things. And if it goes beyond what the region can do, then they go to the state and the state operations center that can move resources up and down the state. But it's this layered approach that we use all the time. And we try to keep things at the lower end of the scale as best we can. But as we know, in some events, it just isn't going to happen. Now, I've talked about this emergency operations center, and I don't know if any of you had a chance to be in when it's activated, but it's there's a lot going on there. And this EOC's job is to look at the entire community, not just the one or two incidents, but support the entire community at that point. And your role in this is that upper right box there that says policy group and guiders. Your job is policy, and there may be issues that come up that require some policy decisions in terms of prioritizing things. But the EOC day to day is run by EOC management, and that would be folks like the EOC director, like typically your city manager. It also includes the public information officers, liaison officers. If the city attorney or district authority attorney is going to be involved, they're at that level as well. And they're overseeing the entire EOC operation. Then starting from the left, operations, this is the group that's coordinating with your field. Public works people, law people, fire people. They're responsible for overseeing everything going on outside. Then the planning section is folks like, they may be tracking your resources. They're developing your daily plans for the EOC. They're tracking the status of what's going on out there. They're checking against, how much progress we're making against objectives. And the plan section is going to run most of our meetings in there. Then logistics is the folks that go get whatever we need to do these other things. In some models, they also run care and shelter. In some places, operations does that. And then finance administration, they're dealing with procurement, whether it's purchasing, renting, leasing. They'd be tracking time and overtime and getting documents ready for reimbursement. They'll also be looking at any risk management issues and trying to document any compensation issues that come up. And while a lot of folks, especially public safety folks, tend to focus on operations, long-term, that finance section is going to be a huge one in making sure things are done properly. And one of the things I do, I sit on the Disaster Recovery Caucus for the International Association of Emergency Managers. But I'm quick to point out, it's not because I'm an expert on disaster recovery, but I have decided I'm smart enough to get on a phone call with very smart people and listen to their advice. And we constantly are going through Office of Inspector General audits from FEMA and looking at the reasons that they take money back. And that's what we want to avoid, that going through this piece too. This could be huge. There are a number of examples up there where agencies received FEMA funds, spent them. FEMA came back and said, we need to get the money back, but you've already spent it. And imagine what that does to your budgets. So that finance piece is a real critical component here as well. And the last thing I wanted to touch on here was a couple last things. One, alert and warning. There's a lot of pieces to this. This has been heavily evolving since 2017. As you know, there was a lot of criticism in 2017 about whether this was done or that was done or how we're doing this. And just my own opinion, we're right on the edge of going too far. There's some messages that come out that may just make you shake your head, and folks are actively trying to get messaging out. Sometimes they should take a breath first. But we have Soco Alert, and that's the main system that Sonoma County uses. It can reach out to phone numbers, landline, cell phones, text messaging, etc. We can pre-establish zones in there, or we can put a dot on a map and put a radius around it and send messages out. The WIA, the wireless emergency alert, is the one that's focused on cell phones. You've probably received a few of those messages, real and test. Then we have the one we're all used to on the television, the emergency alert system. We have Nixle, which is a subscription-based thing. You have to sign up for it, but it's free for the community. And that's used by a lot of agencies to push out things that are almost press releases, but also sometimes warnings and alerts. We certainly are familiar with the red flag alerts and posting the red flags on the firehouses. And then a new thing that's come up in the last couple of years is the installation of these high-low sirens on public safety vehicles that can drive through a neighborhood with this distinctive tone that's supposed to alert everybody that there's an evacuation in process. And so you'll see a lot of times more than one of these will be used, because we're not always sure that one of these will reach everybody. As we saw with the fires, if the hardline phones go down, now we're relying on cell phones. If the cell towers start to go down, then maybe we're relying more on the high-low sirens and things like that. So we try to have these redundant methods in place. Lastly, just want to mention that your staff's got a number of plans in place. The emergency operations plan, this is a public document. that basically describes how the city and the authority are set up to respond. The hazards that we face here locally, those change from community to community, and some basic information on the response process. And that's probably going to get updated in the next year. We're also working right now with the county on a local hazard mitigation plan. This one is a joint countywide plan. These are due every 5 years. This comes out of the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. And this is a key piece in being eligible for certain grants. And we probably will have that finished up in the next 3 or 4 months. And once FEMA's approved, it'll be coming back to the city council for approval. And then we also have some incident specific stuff. We have a power shutoff playbook that was created. Evacuation planning is going on and other things along the way. So we want to just give you a quick overview. You should have the guide that was developed as part of this. And at this point, I think we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Does anybody have any questions? This is Madeline.
I have a quick question. So, and we've been through obviously a lot of emergencies. One of the issues that came up for us is that our former city manager did not want the city council to be in the EOC basically ever because of the Brown Act concerns, and also didn't feel that we could receive information together at the same time. And that turned out to be a big issue. It was pretty weird. And so in terms of getting information at the same time, one, so that we don't burden the EOC director with having to brief us separately 3 times, and also being in the EOC, what are your thoughts about that?
So I would defer on a final opinion to your city attorney. I have spent a lot of time in law enforcement, but not law school. I suspect there are ways that you can do that as a one-directional briefing. For instance, you know, if an email goes out to the council, but it's one direction going, here's what's going on, or a blurb. I think my understanding is where the Brown Act problems come in is when you start talking to each other betweenst yourselves. And so that can start to be a problem. But as you saw, if it's an emergency, you can get together pretty quickly. I think with the EOC, there, you know, the concern I have in the EOCs I've been in is that it tends to be a distraction. Now, to have a city council member come in, you know, call ahead, come in, get a tour of what's going on, ask a few questions one-on-one or two-on-one, that doesn't cause a Brown Act issue because you haven't hit a quorum yet. But you all are also taking the EOC director away and potentially staff from what they're doing. And so timing can be a challenge. But there is an ebb and flow to the EOC once things stabilize, and there are times we can find to do that. I think everybody's just trying to, you know, have an abundance of caution around the Brown Act, but at the same time trying to get you what you need. You know, there could also be the PIO reaches out to 2 of you, and the EOC director reaches out to 2 of you, and the EOC for your town. If I'm available, I'll come in as the EOC coordinator to help support in there. And so that'd be another way of delivering material that we avoid you folks interacting with each other, but still provide you all the information. And obviously, you know, this depends on the emergency. The wildland fires are a fast moving, you know, in progress event. COVID is slow, and we got lots of time to figure some of these issues out. Was that helpful?
Yeah, I think it's just interesting because when you look at our emergency plan, the EOC director reports to the city council. That's how we have it structured. But if the city council can't be in the EOC, which is what we were told, and also we can't get briefings in any kind of real time, something is not right about the idea that the EOC director reports to the city council, because that's,
Well, yeah,
I've been through a lot of disasters now, and that is not been my experience. Maybe that's not what the chart should say, but that is what it says.
Well, I would look at it, the city manager works for you as well. But at the same time, the day-to-day operation of the city is the city manager's responsibility, and the EOC director is running the EOC. And that's where in the earlier slide you saw that, you know, that policy piece is really where you folks come in. I think it can be problematic if it looks like one or more of you is starting to direct staff during the emergency, because it's not your training, it's not your expertise. I think I recall during the 17 fires, a couple of supervisors made a comment about trying to get into the EOC essentially to run things. And they're probably very fortunate that didn't happen, because you really want to leave it to the folks that are trained and practiced in doing this to make those kind of operational decisions, but focus on the policy side, but also focusing on the public outreach and the interface with the community as well.
Thank you, Dave. I have to support Councilmember Harrington because I think you're being kind, and it was not fun trying to get some information. So, and that's nobody's business. It's just ours, and we will work our way through it. So obviously you're giving a better model for us and the reasons for it. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Amy.
And ma'am, I would add, that as we do exercises with your staff, that's certainly a piece we could add into it is to, and I usually, when I write exercises, I usually have inputs from simulated council members, simulated reporters, so the staff has to work through those kind of challenges.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important, having worked, for the Senate, nobody talks to the press. The only thing you say is, what's your name? What's your deadline? That's it.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, for having you folks talk to the press, there's a value to that. They want to talk to you, but we want to do it with making sure you've got the latest and correct information in a supportive way. We refer to it as having a joint information system where the public information officers are on the same page. And we may have a list of 10 bullet points, and the city may push 5 of those, but at the same time, the fire authority may push 2 or 3 other ones, but they're all coming from the same list. It's just they're focusing on, the fire piece of this, and you're focusing on other pieces of it. But we do want to have coordinated and mutually supportive messaging going out, and we don't want folks getting embarrassed because it looks like we're pointing fingers at each other.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dave. I think you're absolutely right. Now it looks like we're moving forward and finding a proper way to be able to handle the EOC. I appreciate that.
Vice Mayor Agramonte,
Yes.
this is Steve Aker.
Yes.
May I just add a couple of thoughts to Council Member Harrington's last situation and what Dave very well stated. I think we've got an opportunity, and I think what we're doing today is a great example of what we can do together in terms of providing timely briefings and information flow to both council members and board members. Between the board and the council, there's 12 members. It would be very difficult for an EOC director to go one-on-one with everybody, but I think in this forum, this feels very comfortable. It feels very effective. And this is something that we could do in the future, as long as we're, again, mindful of the Brown Act, of course, but disseminating information and briefing all of you is very, very important. And if we can do something like that and do a combination of in-person or Zoom that we're all at least fairly comfortable with now, I think that's a great opportunity going forward.
Right. And I feel that we're given a blueprint on how to move forward. So I really appreciate everyone being part of this.
I have a question, Dave. You mentioned about disaster declaration, and about also we can do at a city level. Can you explain a little bit more? It's the procedure, and also you mentioned about the money, how it works. Thank you.
Certainly. So again, your city manager has as the city's emergency services manager has the authority to do the 7-day declaration, but it has to go to council to be ratified to make it a 30-day declaration, and you can terminate it anytime you wish as well. So and you could do the initial one as well, but typically because of the way these emergencies go, for something in progress, usually it starts with the emergency services director. But the real purpose of that is it starts to work its way up the chain to where funding is. Now, the California Disaster Assistance Act is not an automatic thing. And the governors, the last few governors, are not always quick to throw open that purse. And there are reasons for that. But what typically would happen if the state did funding without the feds, then the state would typically offer 75% reimbursement for the disaster related costs, which is a nice chunk of change. What they often do is wait and see if FEMA is going to get involved. And if the feds are going to open up their purse, then what typically occurs is the feds will provide 75% reimbursement. Then the state sometimes will come in and do 75% of what's left. And then you end up with your local share being around 6.25% of your total costs, even better. There are some disasters where those numbers have been fully covered up to 100% or other variations, but that's the typical model for reimbursement. So for every dollar you spend, you end up actually paying, 6 cents and a quarter penny, if both pipelines open up.
All right, that means retroactive. You should keep your records and data or.
It's not only keeping your records, but it's being careful how you do things. I'll share an example. I went to another jurisdiction on mutual aid that had been very hard hit, and it was a small community without a lot of disaster experience. And when I got there, I asked, what's your procurement process? Mm-hmm. And the answer I got is, don't worry about it. The city council waived all procurement requirements. And after I picked myself up the floor and made sure my heart was still beating, I said, have you used that authority yet? No, great, don't. And we were fortunate that a expert in disaster recovery came in and volunteered some time shortly thereafter, because there are rules to procurement. And so while we can do things pretty quickly, we still have to follow those rules. And if you don't follow your own procurement processes, and you don't have some modicum of following your own rules as well as federal procurement rules, FEMA's got no problem saying we're not reimbursing that cost.
Thank you, Dave. It's very, very informative and also educational. It's a good time, especially for our new and council member. Thank you.
You're entirely welcome.
Anyone else have any comments or questions? Mr. Kiff?
We should make sure there aren't any public comments about this. So
Dave, can we unshare? Can
Absolutely.
we unshare the screen? Thank you. That way I can see if somebody wants to speak.
yeah, so I guess Madam Vice Mayor, now, right?
Is that what we're suggesting?
Yep.
Is to take it out of the public? All right, thank you. So is anyone here wishing to speak on behalf of the issues that we're looking at? Is there anyone in the public? Rebecca?
Bill Borum and Celia Cruz de la Rosa are here. Mr. Borum has written in the chat just Dave's contact info, email, and cell, please send to bill@vom.com. Sonoma Valley Hospital Board governing member, and great presentation, Dave. Neither of them appear to be raising their hand, Madam Vice Mayor.
Thank you.
And I'll follow up on that right after the meeting's over.
Thank you. So, Mr. Kiff, what do we do?
Yeah, I'd be happy to conclude, and thank you for your time and your willingness to get together. I do consider this to be training, including for staff and for council members, especially new ones. So, and board members. And this is always helpful. You'll think about some of this, maybe not all of it, during the actual emergency. And we'll just continue to refine our training. As Dave Jeffries noted, if you ever want to dive into more of the incident command system, those courses are available on the website with the state, and it's a good use of time if you ever want to venture down those paths. So again, thank you all.
And I appreciate that, because I actually, Mr. Jeffries, I did copy public and media contact and alert and warning. I thought those were really important. And of course, being prepared and training, highly recommended. So I really appreciated those. I think they're really valid for us as leaders to know these things. So, and I will take advantage of the classes.
I just say that all you have to do is if you Google FEMA independent study, it should take you right to their online classroom.
Oh, great. Thank you. It was so nice seeing everybody. I'm sure Logan was off doing something very, very important because that man is.
Well, let me make a comment there. The mayor texted me back and said he was detained with work. He has the opportunity to review this because this is taped as well as streamed. So I know he wishes he was here.
Yeah, I'm sure he's a great mayor. So it would be, I'm sure we'll see him another time. So I guess, do we end this, Dave? Mr. Kiff?
I think you're ready to adjourn.
Okay, we'll adjourn. Thank you. I have 4:57. 8. Thank you all. Nice seeing everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Jeffries, and all.
You're very
of you.
welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.